Katherine Stanley, welcome to the first Eastport Gallery Literary Evening of the season. When you and I were talking late last fall about having this event, we were envisioning that you would be able to bring your family to Eastport, visit with family, and we'd have a lovely evening down at the physical location of the Eastport Gallery, listen to your writings, have some questions, and enjoy a night of camaraderie. Well, because of the pandemic, that has not happened. So we are really delighted that you were able to join us all the way from Costa Rica by virtual means, all new made. So we're sort of winging it here. As many of you know out there, I am Lora Whelan, a member of the Eastport Gallery and the editor and an assistant publisher of the Quoddy Tides newspaper in Eastport, Maine. Katherine Stanley lives full-time in Costa Rica with her family. She's the former speechwriter for Nobel laureate Oscar Arias, the former director and editor-in-chief of the Tico Times newspaper, co-founder of Jumpstart Costa Rica, and works with a variety of nonprofits and others as a writer, editor, and translator to help them get their stories out there. Her published works include Love and Translation, Letters to My Costa Rican Daughter, the Myology column at the Tico Times, and Shadow Cabinet, a weekly series of interviews of women leaders in the United States. And she's also a poet. So, Katherine, when you and I were speaking about how to shape this evening, given the pandemic, you came up with a super idea, which was to look at duress and how it affects creativity. So you've put together an evening looking at a number of different samples of your own writing over time that you've written during various times of duress in your own life. You've selected a writing by a contemporary author that resonates with you. And you also reached out to some Eastport area artists to find out how the pandemic affected their creative lives. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you and sharing thoughts on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's so nice to be talking to you. I just wish I were in Eastport talking to you, but I'm so glad that it was able to happen this way, and thanks for putting this together. And yeah, we just started talking about what we could discuss tonight, and I've just been thinking so much about duress and specifically solitude and how that can affect our creative lives. And I thought I would start with a little reading from my book, which is here, the Love and Translation, Letters to My Costa Rican Daughter, because this book I wrote when my daughter was a baby and my husband worked nights. And so I would spend a lot of time during the day with a baby, and so who's not understanding anything you're saying. And then I would be alone at night, and I just had all these words to kind of pour out. And so I wrote like never before, and that just became this little book of essays that are addressed to her. And I've just been thinking a lot these days about how some of the solitude that we're experiencing now reminds me of that solitude of new parenthood. And it's just got me thinking about different points in our lives when we are alone or kind of isolated. So this is, I'll read part of one of the short chapters in the book. It's called Isla, What I Would Whisper in the Ear of My New Mom Self. Dear Emma, Isla is the name of the baby a friend of ours is waiting to bring into the world at any moment just across the city. I have been thinking a lot about this lovely word, Spanish for island, and have concluded that it's the perfect name for a baby because birth sets us adrift. She comes and lifts anchor and the family's off to sea, just the parents and that baby in one little boat. Even among partners, within your family, there are times when you're all in your own vessels, sailing close but separately, a wobbly fleet of love. That is why no one can quite understand new mothers in those early days or weeks. if you ever become a mother, my dear, you'll find that any and all advice you receive, and there is a lot of it, is barely intelligible, as if it were being shouted across some vast space from a distant, unimaginable world. It is. It's coming to you across the water. It can be comforting or even useful, but the fact remains that no one knows what's going on in your own boat but you and the captain. The captain is not you, by the way. Your baby has a plan for you, and you are along for the ride. So for now, just ride. You are there to comfort and sing and feel your way in the dark and bail out the ship when it fills with the myriad fluids of newborn babydom, but you are not calling the shots, not yet. Let the waves come, murmur a seafaring song, and know this. In any moment of new motherhood that is rough going for you, there are countless like you. There are also others for whom that very same moment was transcendent and amazing, and you'll probably hear all about it. But you won't be in your little boat forever. Soon you'll realize you've circled up with others, comfortably at anchor, jostling against each other quite companionably off the shores of that nonsensical, psychedelic land of toddlerhood. You'll notice all the boats now look a lot alike. Whether they were handcrafted from locally sourced unfinished wood with organic dyes, or mass-produced using Chinese plastic, they're all covered in some sort of breakfast cereal, and they all have a weird smell coming from somewhere. The mothers are the captains now, though mutinies are an hourly occurrence. These women have a lot more in common, at least within their groups, defined mostly by the presence or lack of a sense of humor. They share and support each other. They are becoming landlubbers. And they remember you out at sea, holding on for dear life. They remember you wistfully, even longingly, depending on the woman. You and your baby, alone on the waters, curled up in a rainstorm, mystified and awestruck, nursing each other into a brand new world. They see your boat out there and remember their own, that place no one else could fully see, that place no one else could truly know, that place they will never, ever forget. They cup their hands and call out to you across the booming surf, annoying things like, enjoy every moment. And you bail out your boat and shake your head. For your baby is already charting her course, this one-woman island, this launcher of fleets, the only one with the power to make you brave this particular ocean. As for you, you will find your sea legs the only way they are ever found, amid the waves. That's Isla.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at that recently and thinking how much it reminded me of this moment, because where a lot of us are alone in different ways and kind of having some of those same experiences. And we have those at different times in our lives too. We have them as new parents. We have them when we first leave our, childhood home sometimes. A lot of times people experience that as they move into retirement or they move to a new place. So it's a kind of a theme we come back to throughout life. And right now, so many of us are living through it at the same time, which makes this a very interesting moment.
Yeah, it's very true. The pandemic is birth, marriage, death, all combined into one extraordinary time where the challenge of understanding it and trying to figure out how to deal with it is quite something. Yeah.
Grief and people get afraid of when it will end and we will be back together. Some people are really comfortable with this. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
How have you found it? I know in Eastport, one great thing is that people can kind of see each other from a distance, at least. That's nice.
It is nice. As you know, we're so small here that we're used to interacting with each other in very intimate ways, whether it's over the produce rack at the grocery store or every Sunday night gathering together to see a movie, or even for me with reporting, having to report on meetings virtually rather than actually sitting in the room with people. I am finding that very challenging. I didn't realize how much I actually enjoyed being physically in those meetings because they can be pretty tedious, but I would much rather be in the room with people than virtual. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're
There's a
all,
lot to pick up on when.
yeah, exactly. I know. So what do you have next for us?
Well, as we started thinking about this theme, we reached out. You did on the Eastport Gallery page, and I also did on my blog, which has really been my creative project this year. And during the pandemic, it's pretty much been my only creative project. While the topic of the pandemic and creativity fascinates me, it has not created a huge torrent of creative work for me because there's so many things happening. But I have kept up with my daily blog, which I launched last year on September 15th, which is Costa Rica's Independence Day. I had come to a point where I really wasn't writing very much for pleasure, and I have a lot of problems with discipline as a writer. And so I said, all right, I'm gonna try to write something every day for a year, every weekday for a year. And I called it the Costa Rica Daily Boost because the idea is, at that time, I felt like we were experiencing a lot of turmoil and stress. Well, man, I had no idea what we were walking into. But the idea is that the posts are generally, some are a little darker, but in general, they try to be a look at something beautiful, inspiring, thought-provoking, and related to Costa Rica. So that's been my project. So all of that is to say that I also shared there. And we're just asking people what they were experiencing with creativity. Was it, were they producing new things? Were they trying new things? A number of people wrote back and said, no, I'm really stressed. I'm reading more, or, I'm doing this or that, but I'm really not producing creatively. But there were some people who contacted us to tell us about some very interesting trends. So one was Amy Ray. And I think you mentioned her in your comments of the first post. So she said, so she's a visual artist in Eastport, correct? Or no?
Yes.
Yeah. So she said, I've been on the most intense, productive art bender since graduate school. I've been in my studio daily and have done over 100 finished works. It's both cathartic and exhausting. My daily life has not altered much, but my brain is much busier and my worries much larger and broader. So I was able to look both of the pandemic series and the Maine Woods series are available on her Facebook page. They're incredible. So that was fascinating to hear from her. I think a lot of us can identify with the brain being busier and the worries being larger and broader. I think it's amazing when you're experiencing that, can pour that into creating art. So that was one comment.
Yeah, I was really interested to see her body of work because, like you, I've been struggling more with production. I tend to need a incubation period, and especially during times of stress, that I find that there's a lot of subconscious stuff going on that only starts to come out maybe 6 months later. And that being patient with yourself, of course, can be hard because it's cathartic to create. So I loved seeing how she was able to create that sense of immediacy through her artworks.
Yeah, it's amazing. I would love to I hope that some of these conversations, continue going on, maybe in the comments section on the Eastport Gallery post, because I'd love to know more about how she does that. I don't know about you, but one of the things I've found is this has made me realize, I remember towards the beginning, a lot of people were saying, this has made me realize how much I love touching my face. I love touching my face. I want to do it all day. Well, for me, it's been realizing how much moving around is part of writing for me. I really like to go to the park or go to a coffee shop. And I didn't really realize how stuck I feel until that was no longer available. And the parks here, we live right next to a park, and it's been closed since March. So just those little things where you're just kind of, in theory, you have more time and you're in your home and you should be able to produce, but it just doesn't work out that way, maybe. So, Beatrice wrote to me. She she makes enamel jewelry, and she's in Costa Rica, and she brought up an interesting point that doesn't affect me as a writer. I don't know if you've experienced it, but she said, what I find difficult is because I don't have all the materials and I'm so used to just running to the store. In this situation, I can't. And so it's challenging in the sense that you have to find other solutions and materials, which adds another level to your creativity.
I found that really interesting because when I saw her response, I was thinking about two things. The first was when this first happened, the Quaddy Tides wasn't too sure that we were going to have printing capacity down at our printing publisher. They were worried about access to paper and also manpower. So that was one issue for us. And then on the artist side, as a visual artist, I don't tend to stock up on huge amounts of supplies because it's expensive. So, I do it piece by piece. And I was suddenly realizing that I didn't have everything. And in particular, what I didn't have were the latex-free gloves that you use to handle paints and pastels that are, of course, essential for healthcare workers. And so I think I had 2 pairs left. They were covered in yuck, and I just made them work. Yeah. But I think her point was a really good one in terms of we set up our lives in certain ways with the expectation that we will be able to keep running them according to set standards we have for ourselves. And when something like this happens, it challenges us in ways that we are no longer used to, but that our ancestors had to deal with every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think there's probably so much happening out there. I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time wondering about all the art that's being made that we're not going to see for some time yet. And we might see Beatrice making jewelry out of things that she never would have done before. Maybe she'll start making paintings, and people who will make sculptures out of things they never would have used. And that will probably for years we'll continue to see really interesting twists that people's artistic lives have taken. The third person who wrote was John Newell. Now, the comment of John's that I highlighted was, dare I say it, I'm thankful for having some bigger blocks of time to get some things done. Now, it made me smile because reading the list of all the other things he's done during this time, I don't know where he has bigger blocks of time because it's just incredible. He's finished a chamber work. He wrote a short piece for the Life in Washington County project, which is incredible. The Eastport Art Center, I mean, as someone who sees the tiniest fraction of everything they're doing, it is incredible, the creativity and ingenuity and how they've been pivoting. I got to see your piece, Grackles. It's amazing, and how they've been knitting together. So your words, I believe in that case, it was John Newell's music, right?
Right.
Clean Dunbar reading. And I'm forgetting the name of the visual artist.
Joan Loudon, a wonderful encaustic painter.
It's unbelievable. I just cannot, it's extraordinary to me, that whole project and just the way the Art Center has been facilitating and connecting artists virtually. Really, out of everything I've seen, you know, anywhere that I'm looking, I really think that's one of the greatest examples out there of artists being very clever right now about how to connect.
Yeah, I agree. I've loved them so far. They're just each little segment, you know, maybe 2 minutes long. They're so rich. You have to watch them numerous times. They're just so
Yeah.
rich.
Are they continuing to make it's still in progress, that project?
Right. Yeah, there are a number more. I want to say maybe there are a total of 12 in that series that will be continuing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your piece, and I just can't wait to continue seeing more. And yes, congratulations to John Newell. It's really astonishing what he's been producing, and I think but in all seriousness, he does bring up a really good point, which is that having longer blocks, even though I haven't been super productive, it is nice to have that flexibility of those of us who are lucky enough to be in a situation where we are at home. It does give us more autonomy over how we set things up. So that's a very good point. He mentioned how he has a lot of cleaning up to do with older pieces and kind of things that are very fiddly and require a lot of time. And he also said, by the way, I did hear a story on the radio about some advice from a literary agent to writers who want to write their great pandemic novel. Don't. So, we noted. I think that's probably very good advice. I wanted to read, as you mentioned, there was a contemporary writer that I wanted to highlight. And this piece is really for, I think for all of us, but especially for those who responded to our query saying, I really am not creating anything, because it's about consuming art. So this writer, Trey Johnson, I think everyone in the world should read him. He's a beautiful writer. I was lucky enough to know him for a short time, about 20 years ago now, and he has just been emerging as a more and more prominent writer on Black culture and art and film. So Trey Johnson, look him up, follow him everywhere he goes. This piece, I think, is just such a beautiful piece about consuming art in general and why it's so important. And it's also a very important glimpse into why art is so important for him and probably for many other Black Americans right now who are facing really urgent challenges in terms of self-care and mental health and self-protection. So his piece is called As Black Philadelphia Protests Injustice, I'm Reclaiming My Power. It was published on June 2nd by the Griot. And he really is describing how at that time, he was seeing the protests unfold and just for a number of reasons didn't feel comfortable and safe joining the protests. And he describes in the piece how he's consuming art in his apartment and sort of preparing. So I'm just gonna read a little part of that. It has been a beautiful thing to watch us all rise up, come out of the corners in our cities that we've been pushed to step out of the various facades that might sometimes hold us back, those work clothes, or that white speak, or that zip code, tossing all of that off, and there we are, gathered like this magnificent village, right into the heart of all those downtowns. From the canary yellow couch of my third floor apartment, I am reopening the tools I've made before last week that have gotten me through this pandemic so far. I am using them as small pieces, relics of power and joy that I have stored throughout my small place, things I can pick up and feel the strength in again when I need it. He goes on to describe books and films that he's watching and rewatching, and everyone should read this whole beautiful piece, but I'm picking it back up again at the end. I am using my new record player and my memory to play the futurists that I've come to love over the years. I am listening to their visions and pleas and ideals of a world we deserve and have not yet fully seen. I am listening for their reverberations of liberation, and I dance in my third floor apartment with its 4 windows so that I can hear the north and the south heartbeats of the city, and I sing into as many of these windows as possible. I am using all these things, gathering all these relics and tools to prepare for the work that lies beyond the mayhem we are not causing, but the mayhem visited upon us for 400 ungrateful years from this country. I am gathering my things and restoring my power to do what the hopeful and diligent of us always also choose to do too. I am using them to begin imagining the world we'll need to create afterward. Trey Johnson.
Tell me a little bit about why that resonates with you so much.
Well, I think that while he's addressing a very specific experience, and the very specific fear that Black Americans are living and have lived, but are living in extreme ways at this time. It's a very powerful and universal message he's getting across about how when we are consuming art, whether it's music or films or books, we are sort of arming ourselves. And I just love how he describes them as tools and relics, and he's bolstering himself up so that he can face what's coming next. So I think it's at once for white readers like me, I think it is really important because it shows us how high the stakes are for this type of bolstering yourself up when you're living through what Black America is living through. And at the same time, it speaks to what all of us on other levels are doing during this time, I think, which is, I've heard a lot about people rereading, children's series. Actually, I've done a little bit of that, going back to familiar books, or just things that take us to a different place. I have been watching, for example, the Indigo Girls live streams. I hadn't really listened to the Indigo Girls since I was in high school, and that's been really interesting. Especially when I listen to the very deep, dark lyrics, and I kind of laugh because then I'm like, why did that speak to me so much when I was 16? Like, it's interesting to come back to something like that, a couple of decades later. Another artist that had a big impact on me during this time is Mo Willems, the children's illustrator. He did a series, actually, I don't know if it's still ongoing, but of drawing classes for kids. He's the Kennedy Center Artist in Residence. And so he started doing these daily little video lessons in drawing for kids. And it was really powerful, not just for my 7-year-old daughter, but for me, just to make something, just draw something. And I can't draw for anything, but just to make little cartoons. And he would have us make shapes and then put faces in them. I think I liked it even more than my daughter did because it was very calming and just kind of to make something. In the very early days when it was particularly unnerving and scary, it kind of gave you a sense of power back, or control, even if it's over a piece of paper.
So did the blog that you've been doing every workday, did that not fulfill a certain part? How did that work for you?
Well, that's been great. As I said, I'm not very good about doing something every day, or having a strict routine. So knowing that I have to put something out there every day has been really helpful. And I'm really glad that I've had that, because I don't think I would have started something like that during this pandemic. But having it already ongoing was really helpful. And I said at the beginning of the project that some days maybe I would just share a beautiful photo and a couple words, and other days it might be a longer essay. So I set the bar low, and some days that's, I think a couple weeks ago I posted something at like 11:55, but I had to get it in that calendar day, so that's been really good. And I've really seen the value of trying to do something every day on a creative level, even if it's really tiny. So I hope I can stick with that in other forms going forward.
And are you still writing poems?
I stopped writing poems, but I did have one, which is going to be the last thing I'll read today, which is just the roughest draft of a poem, which I scribbled in the margins of. One thing I did do was to start a COVID family journal, which it's not very full, but I think that's a good idea. One cool idea I heard, which I might recommend if there's anyone who should come across this and is like, I can't do something creative, I'm too overwhelmed, or I'm too busy doing other things. One cool tip I heard, which I've tried to do, is just to keep lists. If everything else seems too much, you might just make some lists of, buzz phrases in the news during this pandemic. This was on the podcast of the writer Gretchen Rubin. Or things you've eaten, things you're eating a lot of during this time. I think probably almost all of us have fallen into some weird ruts where we're always eating this one thing because it's at the store on the corner, or we can get it online easily. So list those things, or places you went for walks where you wouldn't normally go, but you had to go there because you can't go anywhere else, or shows or art that you've been consuming, music you've been listening to. So I've been doing a lot of that because sometimes that's all I can manage. But I think looking back on that years later is going to be it'll transport us back to this time.
It's a great idea. Yeah. I would love to hear the poem.
Sure. So this is from April. Doesn't it feel to you like we've been in this situation for much, much longer than we have? It just seems, I look back on things I wrote, even if it was just a list or a sentence, in April, and it feels like a different universe, in part because of what's happening around racial injustice in the States and how much that's changed the situation. And also, I think just because of the ups and downs and waves of this. Anyway, in April, I was obsessed with a Jiguiro family. The Jiguiro is the clay-colored thrush. So it's a Spanish name for the, or I guess the informal Costa Rican Spanish name for the clay-colored thrush. It's the national bird of Costa Rica. And there was a nest right outside our little porch. And so in keeping with that time at the beginning of the lockdown, I spent a lot of time looking at that at that nest as I was working or whatever. And so this little fragment of a poem is about that. It's called Will There Be More? Stripped of our trappings, clinging to those that are left us, we shiver in our corners, lucky children in pajamas, peering from the landing while the grown-ups go to work. Doctors, nurses, cashiers, protesters who walk the streets. The eggs have hatched outside my Costa Rican window. Our national bird, the clay-colored thrush. I see their beaks agape, when the mother leaves for worms. I wait with them, eating my toast, drinking my coffee, hoping there will be more toast, hoping there will be more coffee. What have we learned, children? To watch the birds and wait for their return? To open up our beaks and squeak for worms? To chirp forlornly? Or will there be more? The mother is defiant, fierce, so modest, fluffy, the same brown as her shaggy nest. There is, nonetheless, no mistaking her steel. When they are rocked by a gust of wind, she doubles in size, feathers puffing, pinning the babies beneath her to the nest. I watch her from my own nest, this safe place I have not earned. I plumb my depths in search of that same strength, that defense of the defenseless that we have not managed, that just battle that we have not waged, that attention that we have not paid. I meet her little eye and hope. But hope is not a word she'd recognize. Just lay, bring, feed, build, fly.
That was beautiful. How much more work do you need to do on that? That seemed pretty perfect to me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, you can kind of see. So I scrawled it in April, and then I came back to it this past week, and worked on it a little bit because there's. I think that the feeling that a lot of us had at the beginning of this, of we're in our homes, looking out. There are people who can't stay in their homes. Feeling lucky, perhaps undeserving of that luck, or definitely undeserving, I guess, of that luck, whoever deserves luck, and not able to help. And I think that with the situation with the Black Lives Matter protest, that has just it's just churned way up in the past few weeks. So it's kind of been a theme running through this whole time. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping to do a little more, a lot more reading and more writing in the months ahead, and embracing as much as possible the possibilities of the moment. It's definitely breaking a lot of things open, for better and for worse, and so I think we're all learning a lot, that's for sure.
Yeah, we really are. I know. How deep do you go sometimes? Or does the work take you deep? Do you find that you start working on something in a certain frame of mind, and then as you progress, the work itself actually guides you to where you need to go inside? And sometimes that can be a difficult place to go.
Well, I've been thinking about that because I have a tendency to kind of stay on the surface, I think. I have a tendency to want to turn what I'm writing towards something sweet, and I definitely am very comfortable in a tone of melancholy trending towards uplifting. That's just kind of my tone as a person, and definitely as a writer. So I've been thinking about how I could maybe push myself a little bit to go a little deeper and darker. And one thing that's interesting is that when I wrote, this book, which it's weird in the light, but like you can tell just by looking at it, it's very sweet. It's love letters to a little baby. I mean, it's very pleasant and sweet and uplifting, and there's some hard stuff in there. There's, I talk about our experiences with infertility and things like that, but it's quite sweet, and also the rhythm is quite short because it was a blog. It was nightly letters that I was writing to my daughter after she went to sleep. And they're in alphabetical order because each chapter looks at a Costa Rican phrase. So they're only, 2 or 3 pages each. So when I write now, I notice the contrast because being the mother of a 7-year-old is much messier in many ways than being the mother of a baby. Politically, things have changed since 2013 and 14 when I wrote this completely. Now we're in the pandemic and we're seeing, many people in the United States rise up against injustice. So it's just, I'm glad I wrote the book for my daughter because it captures a moment that is completely unlike our current lives in many ways. So to answer your question, that's something that I'm kind of working on, and I'm hoping that the book that I'm working on now is called Becoming Costa Rican. That's my working title for it, because I'm in the process of pursuing citizenship. But I think it will be a much messier project. It's not going to be cute, neat little love letters to a baby because the world is just so much messier right now. So
I think so many of us are taking a look at our process, at ourselves, at how we think and create, and going through the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katherine, this was wonderful. I so appreciate your taking the time. I wish you could be here, but we'll look forward, hopefully, to seeing you next year.
yes.
Yeah. And in the meantime, keep writing and take care of yourself.
Thank you so much. And I hope that when you share this, that people will continue to comment. I'm just fascinated by what the Art Center is doing, what the Eastport Gallery is doing, what all those incredible artists who are in Eastport physically right now, and others who aren't able to get there this summer and wish they were in Eastport. It's just so interesting to see how all of those individuals and groups are tackling this in terms of their health, their mental health, their creativity. So I just can't wait to continue to see how it unfolds for the Eastport community.
Me too. All right. Thank you and take care.
Thank you so much, Lora.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.